Yantev, Shana Tova. The movie Golda came out over the summer. Hope some of you went to see it. It's a movie that takes us into Golda Meir's journey through the Yom Kippur War, of which we're commemorating 50 years this year, 50 years since the Yom Kippur War. And really about her strength and about her agonizing through one of the most difficult, challenging moments in Israel's history. There are these really beautiful clips of Golda Meir, the real Golda Meir as well, interspersed within the movie, where she's at the front with the soldiers and laughing and their love of her and their powerful charisma. She's pretending to be a lady with all the soldiers, and they give her a little teacup and saucer, and she pours Coca-Cola in it and drinks from the cup in the middle of the desert. And later, making a heartfelt plea for peace to the Egyptian president, Sadat. But really, the movie is about her great mistake, right? And explores it in depth. She did not mobilize the army in time before Yom Kippur. The Americans said they wouldn't support Israel if it launched a preemptive strike. And so they were caught unprepared. And Israel, as she says in the movie, came this close to being defeated. And the first few days were traumatizing to her, to the defense minister Moshe Dayan, to the whole nation. And if the Syrians hadn't been confused, thinking that they were able to go so forward into the north because it was an ambush, which it wasn't, then they could have taken the whole north and then maybe the rest of the country. And so the movie posits that maybe it was because there were so many military figures who were all offering different advice at the time, different guidance. And she followed the wrong advisor. And she did, of course, also personally oversee many important decisions that were crucial in that war and helping them win it and take it, and more has been uncovered, and just these last few weeks we've heard more and more about that. But she was the person in charge when the country was surprised and almost destroyed. And the whole framing of the movie is of her on trial, Golda on trial by the post-war commission. And actually, when I first came to the synagogue 8 years ago, we were and also explores her agonizing and all the difficulties. And in that play, they imagined that she was prepared to deploy nuclear weapons and threaten the Americans and Nixon and Kissinger, that she would use the weapons if they didn't come and help her and send the shipments of weapons to help Israel. And so in the movie, one of the great lines of the movie, which was a real line, according to Kissinger, Golda hosts Kissinger in Israel. In the middle of the war, he flies in. She calls him Henry. He calls her Golda. And she's pleading for his help. And so she tries to serve him borscht. And she mentions that the person serving borscht is a survivor. And she's trying to tell him, look, this is where we come from. We're both Jewish. And he says, I just want to make something clear. I am American first, Secretary of State second, and only third a Jew. And she replies, we forget in Israel, we read from right to left. So I remember years ago when our congregation was in Israel for a congregational trip. We were scheduled to spend time in the Herzl Cemetery in Jerusalem, which is where a lot of the early leaders of the state were buried, and really a very powerful and very emotional place in Israel. And it symbolizes the great sacrifice, both of those leaders, but also of everyday people throughout those years and continuing on to come and help the state in its founding. And so before we visited these graves, I wanted to lead a meditation for our group. And so I had everybody sit down and quiet down and come to a place of inner peace. And then imagine that above their heads there was an infinite sky filled with points of light. And that these were the assembly of Israel, Knesset Yisrael, which in my mind is one of the most uplifting ideas in Kabbalah. And it teaches that there's a place in the heavens where all the Jews of all time meet. All right, it's a specific address with all the spiritual power of the Jewish people and alive with our mission throughout the millennia, the reason we were created as a people. And this Kabbalistic idea is based on our ancient idea that we're more a people even than a religion, something we think about on this evening, and resonates with so many teachings in our tradition that every Jewish soul of all time was present on Mount Sinai, that the words of Moses in the Torah applies to all of those present that day, but all of those who are not present today, that is all of us. And that special feeling of togetherness the Jews have and has kept us together over millennia. That we're not just individual souls, and when we one day pass away, we don't just go individually on, but we're part of even up there of some group soul of the Jewish people, the spiritual essence of our peoplehood. And so Knesset Yisrael is all those who are here right now, all those who came before, even those who are not formally Jewish but have a special connection to the Jewish people. And so it's composed of all the patriarchs and matriarchs, and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel and Leah, and of the families of Joseph and the others who went down to Egypt, and all the slaves that were freed as we celebrate in the other great holiday, and those who stood at Sinai, heard the divine voice speaking out of the abyss, and all those who came into the promised land, and all those who built up the land, the prophets and prophetesses, and the judges, and the kings and the queens, and King Solomon and Shlomo HaMelech, who built the ancient temple that was so central to our biblical vision, where we believe that the Shekhinah, divine presence, dwelt. And when on Yom Kippur, the millions of pilgrims over centuries went there to receive peace and the blessing of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. And those who experienced the destructions of the temples and 2,000 years of exile, which culminated in the horrors of the Holocaust, the Shoah. And all those who came during all those years to inspire and guide our people, the luminaries, the servants of humanity, the great thinkers, the artists, the rabbis, the masters, the great light are the 6 million who perished in the Shoah, all those who sacrificed to rebuild the land. And so our tradition tells us that on Yom Kippur, on this day, especially on Yom Kippur, all of that great Jewish soul comes and is with us here on our earthly world to help us in our atonement, to help us in our forgiveness, to help us as we seek a new year. And so during these days of awe, we're taught, we have this special opportunity to connect to that soul of Israel. And so I went through this meditation with our synagogue, and I wanted to do it because being in Israel, I wanted us all to connect in that way, to really feel the power of what's behind our peoplehood before we went into that cemetery to visit the greats of early Israel. And so we saw Hannah Senich, right, who parachuted into occupied Hungary and was caught by the Nazis and tortured to death. We went to the grave of Yitzhak Rabin, murdered, prime minister murdered by a Jewish extremist. I remember his grave had so many flowers and so many pictures and so many notes from well-wishers. And then we got to Golda Meir's grave. And it was bare. No flowers, no notes. It looked like there'd been no visits, no love, no respect. That's because Golda's legacy is mixed in Israel because of the Yom Kippur War. But I remember being distraught, thinking, why so few stones on her grave? And why so little respect for Golda? And why are all the movies and plays all about Golda's mistake on Yom Kippur? And I was brought up to love Golda. I read her autobiography as a young teenager. I remember feeling so connected and inspired. Her story of growing up with all the pogroms and her strength through all of that and coming to America, a story that's so similar to all of our stories. And then getting on fire with Zionism in Milwaukee and her amazing abilities as a speaker and her charisma, her love and caring for Israel and being the only American among those early greats in Israel, and the first woman leader of a Western nation, and only the third woman leader worldwide after Sri Lanka and India. And she may not have been religious, but her love for the Jewish people, for her history, was as deep as any religious faith. And couldn't they see her strength? It was Yom Kippur when it all happened, the day when we are supposed to be forgiven for our wrongdoings. And she's not the only historical figure who's made mistakes, right? Mahatma Gandhi spoke often about his Himalayan blunder, as he himself called it, that he pushed for freedom in India too fast at first, and it led to widespread rioting and massacres by the British, and the opposite of the nonviolence he was calling for and advocating for, and everything just spiraled out of control. And so he purposefully got himself arrested, went to jail because he said he wanted to think about all of it and slow it all down. And independence for India didn't come till many years later, 1 year after Israel. And in the end, he was only partly able to stop all the violence, right, during partition between the Muslims and the Hindus, and the India that he envisioned as one country became three: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. It was a Himalayan blunder. So we all make mistakes. And that is what this day is about. We wish to be forgiven for our own misgivings. And that's why we take our Torah scrolls out of the Ark on this evening. And as we said before the Kol Nidre, before we make that pledge to annul our vows, with the authority of the upper court, with the authority of the lower court, with the knowledge of the Holy One, with the knowledge of the congregation, we declare it permissible to pray among the sinners. Anu matirim lehitpalel im ha'evyonim. And so who are the sinners? What is this prayer talking about? And so historians have gone back and forth about the origin of it, but for a long time they thought that the sinners were the Marranos, the Jews of Spain who had been forced to convert after the expulsion in 1492. And then many later traveled to Europe, around Europe, and re-gravitated towards Judaism. And it was a prayer that was saying that it is permissible to pray with them, that they converted out of duress, and they had drifted from their faith, from their identity, but on this night it was all wiped away, their estrangement was wiped away, and they can be included too, and they're all part of that Knesset Yisrael, they're all part of that great soul of Israel. So the scholars eventually understood that this prayer predates that phenomenon by many hundreds of years, all the way back to the Talmud. But really it was not just about them. The prayer was not just about those sinners, the Marranos, so to speak, sinners, even though its use coincides around that time when this prayer, the Kol Nidre, became more an important part of our liturgy, the Spanish expulsion. But it was a greater message. And that greater message was that it was permissible to pray with all the sinners. And we're all the sinners. We're all the Evyonim. Maybe we don't make the Himalayan mistakes of Golda or of Gandhi. Nonetheless, on this night, we all too gather, just regular people, with all those points of light in the heaven, the Jews of all time, and all those who were born into another faith but chose the Jewish mission, and all those whose heart beats in rhythm to the Jewish mission. And on this night, we confront the truth that we're all imperfect human beings, and that this is the very nature of the human condition, and that it's built into the very fabric of existence. And this is a fundamental Jewish teaching about the world. It was developed by the 16th century mystic Adir, Isaac Luria, and just around that same very challenging period of the expulsion for Spain and the Marranos. And it's a teaching that lifted large segments of the Jewish people at a very difficult time by giving them a teaching that gave them hope, that gave them wisdom. Because the most important Jewish civilization of those early Middle Ages had been in Spain. Maybe the greatest since Babylonia and the Talmud, maybe even the greatest since the destruction of the temple. In 1492, when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella expelled all the Jews from Spain, and they all left, and its flourishing community was decimated overnight after hundreds of years. And this was the America of its time. It was open, philosophy and arts and culture and beauty, producing some of the greatest sages of our tradition, Ibn Ezra, Maimonides, Yehuda Halevi, the sages behind the revival of the Hebrew language and Hebrew poetry. And for the world Jewry, it was a time of great despair, a little bit like after the Holocaust for us. Would the exile ever end? Would there ever be peace? And why was the world so full of suffering and so full of sorrow? And so in response, Isaac Luria proclaimed, there is so much suffering in our world because it is a broken world. And Adir taught this theory of creation that God tried to create a world with infinite divine light, but the finite vessel of the physical world could not hold that divine light, and the whole world shattered. And the result of this shattering, a new universe was created, the one we live in today, where sparks of light are fused together with shards of darkness. And as a result, this is the world that we all know, a world where there's good but also evil, where there's victory and triumph but also failure, where there's light and darkness. And he posited that all the world is in fact in a state of essential brokenness. But that's not the end of his teaching. He went on to explain that the world is broken, yes, but it can be repaired. This is the origin of Tikkun Olam. Just as there is destruction, that there is rebirth, and just as there are wars where good people die, there are also truces where enemies come together and become friends. And so we can lift up all the sparks of light out of the darkness, and we all can return to wholeness. We can all return to our source. And this was his great insight, discovered according to tradition after 7 years spent meditating in a hut on the Nile River in Egypt, that we can all, and our purpose is to all raise up those sparks of light in everyone and everything, and thereby we heal the world. And so, a little bit more history in the 16th and 17th and 18th, and not for 400 years, this teaching spread throughout the whole Jewish world. And it brought a lot of hope, just for your everyday Jew who was looking at his life and wondering where to find hope for the future. It was a new way of looking at life, saying that the brokenness, that's just the nature of reality. It's not that Jews are being punished. It's not that we have some kind of sickness, but that this is the nature of the world. But there's also healing, and every one of us can be part of that healing, and every one of us can do things in this world to make the world a little bit more whole. And that repair and the brokenness are a fundamental part of the way the universe works, just the cycle of the universe. And that's, the Adir said, why Jews were created, to help bring that repair, why we're always at the center of the brokenness, and also why humanity was repaired, why it's created. We all have a purpose, even in our everyday lives, by making little acts of kindness. And so we call this the shattering and repair, Shvira and Tikkun. That through good deeds, through helping out other human beings, through prayer, through kind speech, through using our strength to make good decisions for our lives and our families' lives, it was possible to heal the brokenness that everyone saw everywhere. And that this day, Yom Kippur, was about facing that essential brokenness, because we all have some of that, but stating that it's nothing unusual. It's nothing unusual that we have that brokenness in our lives. We do not have to despair. It's the nature of the world itself. Everything is shattered. We're just doing our best we can with what we've been given. And this is the starting point. And so Golda Meir was agonizing what to do, right? What day the Syrians and the Egyptians and the Jordanians attack, and the Americans said you cannot launch a preemptive strike as you did in the 6-Day War. And so she listened to her military advisors, and the wisdom became that she not being a military person herself, was not as decisive as she may have been. But in the end, Israel is still here. And it's gone through unimaginable growth and development. And now we're facing completely other dangers that are extreme, perhaps the most since those early days of the war where we wondered, would the state survive? But who knows how it would have gone differently even if we had been more prepared. In the end, she did mobilize the army, and she made Nixon and the Americans send weapons, however that all happened, helped direct the war. And Israel came back and ended up in shooting distance of both Damascus and Cairo, could have taken both. And yet, those early victories gave the Egyptians face and restored their honor. And I had an Egyptian friend in college who maintained, whenever we discussed this, that the Egyptians won the Yom Kippur War, the October War, as she put it, which I disagreed with. Maybe that's what led Sadat to come and offer peace 5-6 years later, because they felt that they'd re-found that face. Who knows what was meant to happen? And so Yom Kippur is a time when we're allowed to pray with the sinners, the avaryonim, to see and accept the flaws and imperfections in all of our world, and a time for seeing the imperfections in the human condition, and also a time to come to terms with our own human imperfections, our flaws, as part of a journey. A time when we see the imperfections, and even to pray through the lists of them as we do through this day. We go through one after the other, all of our wrongs, but also understand that this is just part of the condition of the cosmos. This is part of the condition because of that shattering. And to find a faith that it all can be repaired through all of our acts in this world. And this is the theme of our most sacred day where we convene. We sit with our imperfections and we acknowledge that they're here with us. And we also recognize they're far part of the fundamental nature of this world and of our reality. And to be willing to forgive ourselves for just a minute and to stop hiding those parts of ourselves, but just one day to see them. And what a challenge it is to not think that we're defined by all of our flaws forever, but to believe that there is a possibility in healing. And how do we do so? We do so by this long day where we beat our chests and we go through all the prayers. We try and find that place of true self within, our spark within, resolve we won't go down that road again. And so Yom Kippur is that day every year when we believe that this tikkun happens, this repair happens. We've believed this for 3,500 years, a day of faith. That each and every one of us in this broken world has a chance to find that healing. There's a story about the famous philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who was a 19th century German assimilated Jew. And as a young man, he'd had so many profound doubts about Judaism that on Yom Kippur night, he was going to go to shul to say goodbye to his people and then go convert to Christianity. But on Yom Kippur, ready to abandon his faith, he walked into a synagogue. And he started to hear the sound of all the chanting and the sound of the prayers, and it changed something in him. And that experience transformed his whole life. And he not only remained in his faith from a secular German Jew with no connection to his people, like so many Jews in America, he became one of the most important Jewish philosophers of the last millennia. And so what was that power that he experienced on Kol Nidre night? Perhaps it was the power that awoke in him a realization of knowing what he wanted to do with his life and who he was. He was more than just flesh and blood. He was a spirit, spark of the divine, and he was part of a people with a divine mission and source and a tradition going back thousands of years. And that there was a redemptive power that could change his life. And this is a story, one of the most important stories, really a story from where Israel or the Jewish people find its name. The story of our father Jacob, who stole the firstborn blessing from Esau, his brother, by deceiving their father Isaac. and then has to flee to go to his mother's family in Padan Aram, and where he himself is deceived and turned by his uncle Laban. And for 21 years he wrestles and he wrestles and he wrestles with all of his uncle's deceptions, reaping what he himself had sowed. And finally the time comes when he decides to return home. And there he is, returning back to Canaan, met by messengers who tell him that now his brother is coming his way, his brother whom he had deceived so many years before with 400 armed men. And so in fear for his life, he separates his camp into two parts, hoping one of them will survive if the other is destroyed. In the middle of all this desperation, he finds himself in a deserted wadi. And the Torah says that he is attacked by a man, by an angel, and alone in the darkness he wrestles with his fundamental humanity, his brokenness, his divine spark all night long. And finally in the morning he's blessed by the angel who gives him a new name, Yisrael, the one who wrestles with God and human beings. And so this is also our work on Yom Kippur. We wrestle with ourselves and the angel until we discover who we really are. We find a way to pray even with our limitations. We find the courage to recognize and pray with all our mistakes until we discover what's in our own hearts. And so through his great struggle, Yaakov is transformed from Yaakov, which came from the word ekev, heel, because he was grabbing Esau, his older brother's heel, his twin, as he was coming out of their mother's womb. And he becomes the head, li rosh, as our tradition says. If you change the letters of the Yisrael around, it becomes li rosh. Yaakov to Israel, from ekev to li rosh, from heel to head. So this is the journey of Yom Kippur. By confronting all of our limitations, we discover that we're more than flesh and blood. We uncover what's inside our own heart. We understand we have a divine source, and that transforms us. And this is the experience of Yom Kippur. And this was the experience also of the high priest on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, on the most important moment of the day, the high priest would enter into the heart of the temple, the Holy of Holies, and then would transcend everything, been preparing for a long time for that moment. And there he would, the Zohar teaches, he would come in touch with what we were talking about before, the soul of Israel. In that moment, he became one with all of the Jewish people, and that spirit flowed into him. And so when he went out into the courtyard and blessed the people, as is taught, the multitudes who gathered there from all over the land, they all felt that their imperfections and their faults were also wiped away. They realized they were divine sparks. And so this is Yom Kippur. We face our limitations. We discover that great light, who we are. We realize that we too have a divine source. We're part of a great ancient soul stretching back thousands of years into the heavens. And in that place of beauty and oneness, all of our accumulated faults fall away. And this is what Yom Kippur is about. And so Golda was once asked if she believed in God. And she says, well, I believe in the Jewish people, and the Jewish people believe in God. So Golda clearly saw, in my mind, all those sparks in the heavens, her people, and every one of them was precious to her. And she knew that it was that great strength of her people and the mission of our people that was the source of her strength. So there's this really wonderful clip at the end of the movie Golda, where the real Golda, historical footage, is meeting with Sadat, the Egyptian president, the president of the nation that nearly wiped out Israel, but with whom she knew that Israel had to make peace. And they're in this very strangely exuberant mood. They're both just so happy and laughing in this incredible meeting. They're sitting side by side, almost as if they're in a cafe. She's joking with him, and she's speaking with her charisma and power and feeling. And she says to him, well, you know, peace will come when one day an Arab leader will wake up and say, I no longer would like my sons to die and to suffer. And she turns to Sadat and she says, well, you know, I'm an old lady, and I know that you call me the old lady. But I'd like to say and to know that before I die, that you will be the leader to make that peace. And Sadat just laughs. And she says, as a grandmother speaking to a grandfather, and she gives him a special gift to give to his new granddaughter. So this is a real clip, as mentioned. It was not Helen Mirren playing Golda. And there is such a power to the real Golda that an actress could never capture. The charisma of a special soul, a great soul, who'd given their whole life to a cause, who'd been through hell and back, faced great difficulty and hardship, seen their own limitations, but come back on the other side. And also just a beautiful human being, a grandmother turning to a grandfather who is looking to make repairs in the world and saying, what can we do to make the world a better place? You know what, some years later, as she was just months away from her death in the hospital, that same Sadat and Menachem Begin made their historical peace agreement. And this is the power of Yom Kippur, to wipe away all of our slates clean, to face our limitations, to reconnect us to our most profound self, and then to leave us transformed. Good Yantiv.